Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education that leads to a great J-O-B. I am Mark Stucker.
And I am Anika Madden. It is Thursday, October 11th, and welcome to episode number 37. What is the PSAT and why is it important? In this week's news, the two most important college admissions criteria now mean less. And we are in chapter 37 of 171 answers, and we're talking about the importance of the PSAT test. And this week's question is from a mom who wants to know if her daughter should go ahead and apply in the early action round to their top choice very selective school, or should they wait until her daughter receives an official notification of a very impressive leadership award. And Mark wrapped up his interview this week with Mr. Jake Neuberg in part 2 of their discussion on the advantages of taking online test prep.
Friends, I realize that I have talked a lot about my day job and my college counseling work I do at KIPP, but it just dawned on me that our listeners really don't know what you do, Anika. And you're and you're actually the one out of the two of us that actually works at a university. So why don't you share with our listeners kind of what you do for 8, 10, and sometimes 12 hours a day?
14, 15 hours, and Mark always put me on the spot. Well, let me preface this by saying I absolutely love my job. It is hard work, but I absolutely love it. I am a donor relations and stewardship director for a university, as Mark said. And I love it because primarily I'm responsible for reporting to our donors on why their investments are so critical, and I get to show them the impact of their gifts. So that is awesomeness. And I love being back in the higher education arena. And Mark, if this job wasn't the most timely move for this podcast, I don't know what is. How about that?
I love it. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, Mark. I said, all right, Marticle. It's been a morning. Mark, this week's article, the two most important college admissions criteria now mean less. And this is written by Mr. Jeffrey Selingo. Mark, where is this article from? I don't know why I didn't put that in my
The Atlantic. It is, and we've had quite a few articles from him, and he's just a phenomenal writer. So he writes for the Atlantic.
Yeah, this wasn't.
Sometimes he writes for Washington Post, but normally he writes for the Atlantic. Yeah.
Yep, I have seen that. Mm-hmm. So, Mark, another great article he has written, and this one is about the two primary metrics that at one time these universities were able to quickly take and say, "Oh, you've got the best test scores, you've got the best grades, you're in here." And that's just not the case anymore for a variety of reasons. And I think primarily, Mark, what this article is saying is that everybody's banging it out. Like everybody's doing well. And, even with the standard, with the testing, we've been talking about these test optional schools, these schools moving away from the standardized testing, and it just not being that solid metric again that's being used. So, Mark, take it away. Tell us how you're feeling about what he's saying to us.
So I love the great article. I love his writings. So I'm going to use an example that I think will, resonate particularly this week. Just was it yesterday? Judge Kavanaugh was confirmed for the Supreme Court, and so there's tremendous division in the country right now between Democrats and Republicans, and in the same way, and there's this complete divide politically. There's really this complete divide when it comes to colleges between the haves and the have-nots. And so while 80% of colleges are accepting the majority of their applicants, there's this other, and estimates vary, but it's somewhere between 10 to 20% of other colleges that are way more competitive than they've ever been. An example that the article refers to is the University of Pennsylvania, which in 1991, as an Ivy League school, Anika was taking almost 1 out of every 2 kids. All right. Fast forward, 25, 27 years later, and now they take less than 1 in 12 kids. So for those schools, it's harder and harder and harder to use grade point averages and test scores to figure out who you're going to admit, because everybody has high grade point averages and high test scores. So it's not a differentiator. Mm-hmm. And so, just this week, I got to experience firsthand sort of both of these schools. So I did 2 different counselor programs this week where I come in as a counselor and I visit college and show me around and do all this sort of stuff, lunches, tours, all that. So on Thursday, I met with Rick Clark, director of admission at Georgia Tech, had lunch, got to talk to him a lot about what they're doing there. And Friday, I was at Reinhardt University, got to meet with Lacey Satterfield and Julie Fleming, their director of admission and VP in enrollment, for lunch. So 2 lunches. Now, when I met, I'm gonna work it backwards. So on Friday, when I met with Reinhardt, they exclusively make decisions off grade point averages and test scores. If you have a 2.25 GPA, they recalculate the grade point average based on your core classes. And if you have an 18 ACT or a 970 SAT, you're in. So that's an example of the majority of colleges that are out there, right? Mm-hmm. Still using grade point averages, still using test scores. You got the metrics, you're in. And that's also what 80% plus are using to determine who gets scholarship money. On the other hand, when I met with Rick Clark, I said, Rick, I do not know of a school that a public school that evaluates an application better than you. I'm so impressed with how they read files over there. They're looking at every little nuance to make sure that they admit the right kids. And Rick said to me, he said, well, we just started doing that about a decade ago because we had virtually an impossible problem. As we surged in our popularity and our applicant flow, how are we literally going to differentiate between all these kids with skyrocketing test scores, skyrocketing GPAs? And so we had to start looking at all kinds of other different indices to make that decision. For example, Nika, the average tech student has a 14.67 SAT, a 31 ACT, a 3.97 GPA, and 9 APs. Mm. So when every kid literally is coming in with 1,400 plus test scores, not everyone, but almost everyone, all right, how are you really going to differentiate? And so this article now talks about how for that group of schools, and remember, that is the minority of schools, by far the minority, but for that minority, they're now looking at other criteria. And They quote Eric Furta, the director of admission, dean of admission at Penn, in the article, and he says that those things are just snapshots, grade point average and test scores, but we got to go way beyond that. Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I know all about the holistic process, and we've talked about it quite a bit. It's how you're standing out in your leadership and your extracurricular activities. And I think even at one time, Mark, we were saying that even starts to become a little, looking all the same. Because if you're not, or maybe we were talking about the volunteering thing. Do you remember we were talking about how do you stand out if everybody's volunteering or if everybody's putting in X amount of hours? Right. It's about you showing, really distinctive leadership, that maybe you've started something or that you've, I don't know. It's just you got to really go above and beyond in marketing yourself, essentially. So it's tough. It's a lot to look at. But what do they care about? I think is most important. What do they care about? Like what is the culture of that school?
Well, what I would say is focus on just you being the best you can be, mm-hmm. and then apply to schools that appreciate and value what you bring to the table. Right. I think that's the best approach. But with this increased selectivity, more applications, right? For lots of reasons, by the way, which we've talked about in other podcasts, more international students, rankings are driving everybody to focus on these top ranked schools, growth of the high school population, more kids going to college, all these reasons we're getting a surge in kids all clustering to these sort of top 200 schools. And what it's making schools do is focus really with a fine-tooth comb on extracurriculars, on recommendations, on demonstrated interest, on essays, mm-hmm. on what major are you declaring, on demographics like gender and race and geography, and on things like your grade trend. So I don't know if you recall, but Eric Furta says in the article that we're increasingly starting to look at what was your trajectory from the time you came into high school and what did you do with the opportunities that you had? Did you take advantage of them? And too much is given, much is required. And so it's just forcing schools to find more and more ways to differentiate, because when you have a whole group of applicants and they all have high testing and they all have high grade point averages like tech and many other schools, then guess what? You can't use those as factors to figure out who you're going to admit and who you're not going to admit because it doesn't work anymore.
Right.
Yeah. And so it's kind of a new day in college admissions. But before people stress out, just remember, this is the minority of schools, 10 to 15%, you know? And if you're that child that has, that criteria, then you can look at those kind of schools. If not, there are plenty of schools out there like the Reinhardt universities that would love to have a real good, average, well-behaved kid.
Awesomeness.
And for me, it was just really, this article just so coincided nicely because I happened to do 2 counselor events this week at 2 different schools that are using 2 different methods. And so it's like, we didn't plan that, but it just kind of worked out.
Love it. Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
All right, listeners, if you're a first-time listener, this is the part of the podcast where we call it our sort of systematic walk through the college admission process, and we want to make sure you have no gaps in your background. So systematic in that we started out by focusing on what major and career your child should select and how they can know what's the right major and career for them. And then we talked about how to build the right college list. We did 18 episodes on that. And now we're into the portion where we talk about how do you get in the colleges that you have agreed to apply to. And we're doing 65 episodes on this section, and we're, about 10 episodes into that 65. So we're going to be here all the way up to week 93. And so, Nick and I aren't going anywhere. So we're not going anywhere because the whole book I wrote is called 171 Answers and it has 171 chapters. So our commitment to you at a minimum is to be around for 171 straight weeks, a minimum.
That's right.
And so this is week 37, and it's actually the first of 18 straight weeks where we're going to be talking about some component of standardized testing. And I know that sounds like a lot, but the way I came up with this book, 171 Answers, I just brainstormed for several months. And I said, what are the most asked questions that I get as a college coach? And then I said, well, why don't I take the most frequently asked questions I get and turn each question into its own chapter? And so that's kind of what I did. And there happened to be 18 questions I get a lot about standardized testing. And so the first one today is what is the PSAT and why it is important? So anything you want to say to kick it off, Anika? Because I'm kind of tired of hearing myself talk.
Well, can I start off with my shame in that I've never understood the purpose of it. Whenever these schools talk about it, I'm like, yeah, whatever. This is the first time I've been fired up about it a little bit, obviously, because I've been working more and more closely with you. Janae is about to take it next week. I've gotten a series of emails. Series of emails from her school saying the booklet's in her box and she's got these assignments and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, I guess we do need to be focused on this a little bit more because I just didn't get it before. So I know that it's in preparation. Well, okay, let me tell you how I think I know about it.
Okay.
And that it's basically a indicator of how well you're going to do on the SAT test, on the actual SAT test. And I know the scoring is not exactly the same. And I know that it's tied into the National Merit Scholarship Program, which I totally don't understand because if kids aren't into the SAT, they're actually going toward the ACT. Why should they really care about the PSAT? So that's where my confusion comes in, and that's where I turn it back over to Mark.
Great. So that was good, by the way. Now, yes, one of the purposes is to see whether you qualify for, National Merit Scholarship Program, but that's our entire episode next week is what, not our entire episode. Sorry. We have 4 segments to every podcast, right? We have our question from our listener. We have our book segment. We have our article. And we have our interview. So it's that component of the book is looking at the National Merit Scholarship Program. So let's table that for now. Let's just do a brief overview of what it is and then why it's important. And you hit on some of these points. So I'm just going to elaborate, Anika. So it is the preliminary SAT is what it is. So it is absolutely a test that is a fantastic indicator of how well you will do on an SAT. It began in 1971. It's administered by the College Board. It's administered at nationally assigned test centers. It's not administered at nationally assigned test centers like the SAT is. The PSAT is administered at local high schools. The test takes 2 hours and 45 minutes, and the score ranges from 320 to 1520. Each question is a multiple choice question with 4 options, and there are 48 reading and writing questions. which you have 60 minutes for. There's 44 language questions you have 35 minutes for. There's 47 math questions that you have 70 minutes for. And some people will say, well, why is it out of 1520 when the SAT is out of 1600? And that's because it leaves off the most advanced questions that the SAT has, because a sizable number of students may not have had the courses yet to enable them to do well on those questions. So that's the reason why it's out of 1520, not 1600. But when you look at why it's important, Anika, the reason why it's important, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before in the last segment of our podcast. If 80% of colleges are going to use 3 criteria to determine where you're admitted, your test scores, your grades, and your courses you've selected, then you want to make sure you're doing everything you can to get those test scores as high as possible. Mm-hmm. And the PSAT, particularly the redesigned PSAT, do you know what I mean by the redesigned PSAT, Anika?
Well, I'm assuming because the SAT just got redesigned, both the SAT and the ACT, right? Yeah.
And exactly. And because the PSAT is a preliminary SAT designed to predict how you do on the SAT and to diagnose strengths and weaknesses, it got redesigned to reflect the new SAT. Mm-hmm. So great. So the value of the PSAT is, and this is really helpful, is that it is going to let you know what SAT score would you likely to get if you were to take the test right now. And that becomes very helpful because you can see if you're on pace for certain schools you're interested in. The other real value is that it's a tremendous diagnostic tool where you can not only see what score are you on pace to get, but you can also see where are your areas of weaknesses, where are you losing the points, what parts of the test will you need to study for to improve your score. And then the final thing is that it allows you to compare your projected SAT to an ACT, which will let you know which test you're better at. So that's a mouthful, but love to know your thoughts.
Well, I was just going to say, let me backtrack my steps, because Janaea took the practice ACT, which she absolutely hated, and she took a practice SAT. But this was before what she's done. I feel like they did the PSAT last year too. Again, this is in my I don't really care about the PSAT time.
Right.
So I can't really remember.
So let me comment on that. I'm really glad you brought that up. So what a lot of schools do is they will administer the PSAT in 10th grade as a practice before the preliminary. And some schools do it in 9th and 10th. Like the private school that both my kids went to, they administer the PSAT in 9th and 10th. And so it was a way of seeing where are you tracking for? What are you on pace for? But it's really the one in the 11th grade that I say is a good predictor, because the SAT has so much algebra 2 in it that most students haven't had the algebra 2 that they need to do well. So when I say, like, a lot of times students their scores will soar between 9th to 10th to 11th. And that's just because they're being exposed to the content in their courses so they can actually answer the questions. So we're going to come back in episode 44 more to how to compare the ACT to the SAT and know which test is better for you. But the bottom line is the PSAT can be a tremendous predictor of how you'll do on the SAT. And it can really provide a roadmap for letting you know what components of the test you need to focus on, because the diagnostic tools are really good. So no college receives it. It's not part of your college application. It literally is a preliminary test. No college requires the PSAT, none. But that's the value. And I think it's actually very helpful.
Okay, last question. So sure. I'm going back to next step. So she she's about to take the PSAT, but so she took those practice tests, right? She's like, I'm taking the SAT because that's going to be my thing. She's already decided that in her mind. So if she takes this test next week and doesn't do well, is that going to make her rethink, oh, maybe I do need to look at the ACT? Does that serve some role in that?
Once again, we're going to do a deep dive in episode 44 on how to know whether the ACT or the SAT is better for you.
Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but that's okay. No, it's a fair question. And so the bottom line is you want to be comparing the scores of both of the tests. So let's just see how she does on this test, and let's compare it to an ACT, and then I'll be able to guide you from there. Was that evasive, or did I answer the question? Because I don't want to be taking some circuitous path and you don't get your questions answered.
Totally evasive. Just kidding. No, I get it. And no, it's just but it does. This is like rushing through my mind because literally she's about to take this on Wednesday. So I'm just like, because she's pretty dead set. And one of the things that you pointed out is that the kids, kind of panic because they think that they take this PSAT and they do really bad and they thought it's reporting to the school and, it's not going on your official record or anything like that. But also just how they feel in general about the testing itself. My emotion is right now caught in Naya and just that moment of her getting those scores back. That's right.
Well, I mean, it's great for us to be talking about this, Anika, literally at the time when you have a daughter in 11th taking the test next week. It could not be better. I mean, this is really, this isn't theory, right? Like both of my kids are, one's a college graduate as of last year and one is a college sophomore. So they've been through this, but you're in the midst of it. The one thing that I would say, and I'm going to talk about this more next week, Anika, for most students, overwhelming majority, I do not believe they need to prep for the PSAT at all. I'll talk to you about more next week about who should prep and who shouldn't. But for most people, go in and just take it. And it is what it is. And let's use it as a diagnostic tool.
Oh, I like that.
Pressure off.
Pressure removed. Thank you, Mark.
That's a good thing.
Yes, it is.
It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Okay, Mark, our question is coming from Emily, and Emily is in Barrington, Rhode Island. And Mark, she wants to know, her daughter is waiting on an official leadership award. Specifically in this case, it's the Girl Scout Gold Award. Congratulations. But they haven't gotten the official notification yet. So she wants to know if they should go ahead and apply in the early action round to their Mark, our question is coming from Emily in Barrington, Rhode Island. And Emily wants to know if her daughter is waiting for an official leadership award. In her case, it's the Girl Scout Gold Award. Very big deal. And what she wants to know if they should go ahead and apply in the early action round to their top choice, very selective school. So we know that in itself makes a difference if you're applying to early action or not. And should she wait until that award is made official, or should she go ahead and make it into that early action round? What do you say?
First of all, shout out to Emily in Barrington, Rhode Island. We love our Rhode Island listeners, by the way. That's a small state, but they pack a big punch. We got quite a few listeners there. So I love her question. And this is one that's actually a really easy question, even that there's a clear, definitive right answer. That it's a question that a lot of people would have. It's a great question, but it's a clear answer. And the answer is that she should absolutely apply early. And so just to recap, so there's two options, right? Wait until you apply in the regular round, and you might have this other prestigious award that can go and be included for evaluation. If you apply early, they're going to have to make a decision before the award comes out. So that's not going to be on her resume. So why do you think I would say it's a clear, definitive, slam dunk, apply early? Anika, what do you think?
Because I'm thinking that she can speak to it still in some context, even though it's not official, right?
Sure, she can speak to it, but why apply early without the award versus apply later with the award?
Because I think that's the impact of the early action process. I don't know. I honestly don't know, but I'm guessing that the early action could be just that critical in terms of your chances. If you're talking about a highly selective school, like that probably trumps you waiting for an award to come in because of the high selectivity of that specific school.
Bingo. So it's funny.
Look at that.
Yeah, it just seems like this week all of our segments are kind of flowing together, which is kind of nice. We don't plan it this way. It just kind of works sometimes. So when you go back to what we talked about in our article by Jeffrey Selingo of The Atlantic about these two criteria, GPA and test scores, are no longer really cutting it for selective schools, right? And so they're having to look at other things. Now, one of the things I didn't mention that they're looking at is they are increasingly looking at who applies early. Now, for several decades, they've been doing that with early decision. Early decision for several decades now has been something where admission acceptance rates were significantly higher because students were making a commitment, and that helps the school so much with its planning. And because it was such an indication of your enthusiasm level. So schools are figuring, we're getting this enthusiast. It's going to come on, wear the t-shirt and the pom-poms. We're going to love their energy, and we can lock them in. So for a long time, ED rates were much higher acceptance rates than regular. But just in the last couple of years, Anika, I've really started to notice, and I've had multiple schools tell me that they are differentiating between who applies early action and who applies regular. And it's just one more way that schools are trying to figure out who's serious about them and who's not. And so schools are looking at it and they're almost saying that to some schools, not all. And it tends to be very selective schools that do this the most, sometimes not the most selective, but very selective. I know that's confusing, but anyway, what they're saying is, if we've provided a way for you to apply early and it's not binding, meaning you're still not obligated to come and you choose not to take that, then you're sending us a message that we're just an afterthought, right? We're just an afterthought because they're out saying, why would you not do that? Like, we're not going to make you come. Remember, early action, you apply early, you're notified early, but you have until May 1st to still compare this acceptance to other schools. So schools are saying, you know what? Chances are you're probably just adding us on as school number 5, 6, 7, or 8 on your list. You're not that serious about it. We're going to focus on people who've been actually thinking about us, planning for this, getting their information in early. Now, in fairness, that isn't always the case because you might hear about a school after the early action deadline, but that's going to be the way that it's interpreted. And the upside of applying early action, of which, as I say, I'm increasingly seeing schools differentiating between early action and regular, outweighs the fact that, quite honestly, I'm going to get more into this in other cases, but most students and families would be surprised if they realize that an extracurricular award, even a prestigious one, usually is not what makes or breaks an admission decision. Most families and students I work with, Anika, they tend to think that an extracurricular award counts more than it actually really does.
And that's interesting.
And so, even this week when I was meeting with Ray Clark, I asked him a question about a student in particular. I have about 6 Georgia Tech applicants this year that are applying early. And I asked him particularly about a student. I said, I've got this student and they didn't have the greatest 11th grade year. I mean, not straight A's. And for Georgia Tech, having a few B's on there is not a great year. But they've got great curriculum, great test scores, good recs. Should they wait until they have a good semester and apply regular in January so they can show you one more strong semester? And now, in the past, I might have advised that student to do that. But because of how it helps schools to get these applications in early, I wasn't surprised when he said, no, Mark, have them apply now. If there's any chance he has of being admitted, we'll either accept him now or defer him to the regular round. It will not hurt him.
Okay.
So yeah, the bottom line is that to summarize it real succinctly, the advantage of applying early outweighs the advantage of having an award on your resume that you're not going to have if you apply early. It's just no question about it.
That, quite frankly, they may or may not so much care about.
Yeah. I mean, sure, there's some national awards when you win national competitions in, math and science and certain things that are impressive. But here's the other thing. There's opportunities at a later date to have the school counselor reach out and share it, to potentially have it be communicated in other ways to the school. So in some cases, you don't even lose out on your ability to communicate to the school that you got the award, depending on when, of course, you're finding out, and depending on when it comes down. So what are you thinking?
Wow. I think Emily and her daughter are going to do very well.
I agree.
Putting that good vibe out to them. And I think that's great. But I do think that's interesting, though, that we put more weight on some of these things than the schools actually do.
Definitely.
So my brain just immediately went toward, trying to get into the brain of the admissions officer, just sometimes impossible. So to your point earlier, let's just be our best selves, whatever that is, and go forth accordingly.
Be your best self.
And if that means early action,
be your best self, and then find schools when you're building your list that will appreciate who your best self is. And don't be afraid to, take a flyer on a couple, here or there that maybe, you may not get in, but you're interested in. Nothing's wrong with that. It won't kill you if you get a denial letter. You'll live. Friends, I think I had more text messages this last week about the first part of that interview we had with Jake Neuberg than any other interview. So I really hope you'll stay put and listen and enjoy our second half. Friends, in part 2 of my interview with Jake Neuberg, Jake shares what Revolution Prep does for students who really struggle with organization. Jake describes the Revolution Math program. Jake shares Revolution Prep's unique homework help program. Next, Jake describes how they work with kids who don't like math. Jake gives his advice to young kids who want to improve their scores. Jake surprised me by saying that families come for test prep, but they leave with something even more important than test scores. Jake shares 2 amazing stories of kids who drastically improved their test scores. Anika and I think you really will enjoy the final part of my interview with Jake Neuberg.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Talk to us a little bit about the services, because I know in addition to, we'll talk about the tests that you provide test prep for, as well as the subjects that you do tutoring for.
And that was the other thing that was amazing when we went online, is we would have a need for something in Long Island, let's say way out on Long Island, and we had an amazing tutor for that subject. It was Latin, but that tutor lived in New Mexico. All right, it doesn't do us any good. But now when we're online and we have 200 of these full-time tutors, we have such tremendous expertise. So we've really been able to expand what we provide services in. So it went from being mostly test prep to now we have really can offer great tutoring and great help for students from kindergarten into college. And so what does that mean? That means ISEE and SSAT, right? The entrance exams into middle school and private high school, as well as the SAT and the ACT and the SAT subject tests. We do GMAT and GRE tutoring for people applying to grad school. We even do a little bit of LSAT tutoring. But the vast majority of what we're doing is high school and younger. A lot of tutoring in academic subjects, especially math and science, executive functioning. A lot of times kids in high school and middle school will be struggling in English class or history class. It doesn't have anything to do with English or history. It has to do with their executive functioning skills, time management, planning, stress management. So we offer a class in executive functioning. We offer tutoring. We train all of our tutors in these executive functioning, how to teach these executive functioning skills. So if you're working with a student in English or history or math or anything, and you see that the real cause is executive functioning, then you can address those. So we work with kids the full gamut. And one of the things that really struck us is as we were working with high school kids, we would have kids coming into high school saying things like, I'm just not a good test taker. I'm just not a math person. And that's where, as people, and for me personally, someone who I love math and I'm super nerdy about math, and I also am a really good test taker, and I used to be a really bad test taker. It's something that I'm really passionate about. And so that's a big part of why we started working with kids younger. We have our Revolution Math program for elementary. We have our homework help program for kids in all grades. So that's another really cool thing about online, is it not only enabled us to increase the quality, enabled us to increase our geographic footprint. We work with kids in all 50 states and 40 countries, but also it enabled us to really expand the breadth of services that we offer, and at the same time have just amazing quality.
Well, I'm glad when you said you work with kids as low as kindergarten, you weren't talking about SAT, ACT there, because I think some hearts would have been beating pretty hard there. So,
but it's funny because we get people asking us about SAT prep. I'd say the earliest we get it is like 8th grade. And what I say is, you know what? If you do direct prep for a student really before they finish their sophomore year, you're probably going to be doing more harm than good. What I tell families is say, look, unless they're like really close to a perfect score and they just want to get it done as a sophomore, or they're a recruited athlete and they need to get a score sophomore year, that kind of thing. Other than that, we say, focus on your grades, get good grades. And then when you finish sophomore year, that's when you can focus on actually doing the test prep, increasing those scores. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't things you can't be doing now. There's a lot you can be doing. And the guidance that I give is really 2 things. Get your kids reading, and reading as much nonfiction as possible. Just get them reading and talking to them about what they're reading, and improve, because that's the section on the SAT and the ACT that takes the most time to increase your score on, is reading comprehension. And the other is make sure that you never hear them say, I'm not a math person. Make sure that your kid is really understanding math and liking math and growing in math, because math builds on itself. And it's hard. Math is hard for anybody. And so that's the guidance I give to anyone with kids younger than sophomore year in high school is those are the two things you can do to A, make their SAT or ACT scores higher, but B, just make their lives easier every grade of school.
Give us a story that a real story of someone you worked with, Jake, that you're somebody on your team that's just particularly rewarding. Maybe an example of somebody that came in not scoring well and certain things were put in place, and then you saw a score surge. Love to paint a picture of an actual situation if somebody comes to mind.
I have two that come to mind. I'll start with one. If you want another one, I'll give you the other one. But one of them, I sat down with his dad, and the family lives in Israel. And so you have the language barrier, and the student had already been accepted to the University of Tel Aviv, which is a fantastic school. But English was his second language, and he had been in the Army for 5 years, so he was even removed from school. And they said, if he's going to apply to school, he's really only interested in Stanford, Harvard, and MIT. And now my heart starts beating. I'm like, oh my God. The admit rate of these schools is right around 5%.
Right.
I
know. I'd work with them.
I don't care how amazing everything is. There is a very good chance that you won't get in. And they said, you know what? That's okay. We understand that. He's already in at a grade school. And I said, okay. And I looked at his scores. And this is such a smart kid and such a hardworking kid. And he was doing great in school, but he'd been out of school for 5 years and he went to school outside the US. So his SAT score in the math even was in the 600s, and in the English, it was in the low 500s. And I said, you're going to have to work really hard. And by hard, I mean 5 days a week, a couple hours a day with a tutor and one of our best tutors. And then you're going to have to do 2 hours of work on your own outside of that. And you're going to have to do that for months and months and months. And the kid said, I can do it. And he did. And he worked at it and worked at it and worked at it. He got to the point where he had a perfect score on both of his SAT subject tests. He had perfect or near perfect on the math. And he got his reading comprehension. Now, this is a kid who English was his second language, up to I think very close to a 700. Now, the math is hard because the math has a lot of reading comprehension and word problems and that kind of stuff. Well, so proud of him. He just graduated from Harvard last month. And he's headed to Harvard Business School. His sister, who came 2 years after him, is just finished her sophomore year at Stanford. So it's one of those things that I think is such a great example of if you're willing to work hard and really work hard, sky is the limit on what you can achieve. And to me, my favorite part of it is that both of those students and their parents would say the most significant thing about their experience wasn't even that they got into Harvard or Stanford, which is anybody's reach and dream school. It's that the tutor that they work with is a gentleman named Ryan Chafee at our company who I just adore. We've worked together for 15 years. I don't know if there's anyone in the world I respect more or am more impressed with. He's like a 5-time Jeopardy champion. He's been in like 5 other trivia game shows. I've had dozens of people tell me he's the most inspirational teacher that their kid has ever worked with. And that's exactly what happened with these 2 kids is their parents said they're more intellectually curious. They read for pleasure. They care and know more about the world and love learning more than they ever have before. And that's what we really try to do is people pay us to increase their SAT scores. And we do that and it's important. But I tell all our tutors, if that's all we did, we have squandered a massive opportunity to inspire these kids to be better students, to be more intellectually curious and thoughtful, and to seek to challenge themselves. So that's one of my favorite stories. I'm still good friends with the parents as well as both of the kids. And for me, that's so fun to get to be there in the trenches and having those conversations and working with such talented tutors.
Well, that was so good. Let's go with the second story. The second story wasn't the sister, was it? It wasn't the sister.
No, second story was longer ago. It was right probably 15, 16 years ago. There was a student and he was referred to me by one of my other students. And I went over to his house and I said, hey, what are we doing here? I think it was the summer before senior year, where are you going to college? And he says, I'll show you my list. He shows me his list. And I think number 1 on the list was like Wisconsin. I was like, cool, you want to be a Badger? And he's like, what? I was like, a Badger, the Bucky Badgers, University of Wisconsin. He's like, yeah, I guess. And I was like, well, what do you mean, man? Like, college is amazing. You can't go into it like, eh. He says, well, I really want to go to USC. And I was like, well, I don't see that on your list. And he says, well, people told me not to apply because I'd never get in. And I said, well, if you don't apply, you'll never get in. Apply, and I will work with you. Now, here's the cool thing. This kid was paying for my tutoring out of his own pocket. He had a job. He was on financial aid at the school. And so I said, all right, how much do you get paid? He said, I get paid $10 an hour. I said, all right, you pay me 20 because I'm a college grad and all that kind of stuff. And so it was a discount on my rate. I would go to his house because this was before it was online. And he would make me lunch every day that we were working together. Like, it was amazing. And this kid worked and worked and worked, and his grades came up and his SAT scores came up and his college applications were amazing. Sure enough, he got into USC. And not only did he get into USC, but he met somebody there where together they started a business that now that business is like $100 million in revenue.
Oh my goodness.
My wife was actually just left a couple of months ago, but spent 2 years as their chief marketing officer for 2 years. So you talk about coming full circle.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
So your wife ends up getting a job at the company that your former student starts. That's pretty cool.
Pretty cool. It was pretty cool. We had him and his co-founder and their wives over for dinner a couple of years ago, and they kind of convinced my wife to leave her job and go work with them. And it was just amazing, and he's such a great young man. Now he's got 2 kids of his own and he's running this business. And what touched my heart is at his college graduation, he thanked really one person. He said, this wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for Jake. Right. And I had tears in my eyes and I was like, look, you might want to thank your parents also, because, don't come after me for your tuition checks, buddy. But like, those are the things that get me really excited. And to this day, he's a good friend and his co-founder is a good friend. I've had other students from years ago that I'm still in touch with, but those are the kinds of things that I want to do personally, and I want our tutors to do. Is your job isn't to get them better scores. Your job is to increase their confidence and to set them up for success in life. And I get it that that's asking a lot and that's bold. And some students are more ready for that than others. But that's what we seek to do every day.
That's fantastic. We're going to start to wind down in a second. But one thing you said, Jake, you just touched on it, but to me, it's one of the very attractive things that you offer is homework help. So can you explain to our listeners kind of how homework help works? Because that was really an ingenious idea.
Thank you. Yeah, homework help is really cool, and I wish I could take credit for it, but it really kind of came from, we work with the best schools all over the country, and all the time we'll sit down and say, hey, what do your kids need? How can we help your kids? And what we were hearing from so many parents and from so many schools are, look, there's a lot of kids that don't need a tutor every week in a given subject. But what they need is sometimes at 10 o'clock at night, they're sitting there struggling with chemistry or algebra 2, or maybe it's their essay for AP US history. And they don't need a tutor every week, but boy, could they use some help for 5 minutes right now. And so that's what homework help is really the solution to, is think of it as a really talented tutor right there at your beck and call when you need them. And so a student can be, for $99 a month, they can subscribe to it. Anyone who wants to sign up over the summer, it's only $1 a month over the summer. And they can have access to 37 academic subjects, as well as SAT or ACT or any kind of test prep in terms of getting question and answers on going over a practice test. And if you have the subscription, you need that help, you log into your Revolution dashboard, you click on the button for the subject that you want, and you drop into a little virtual classroom where you can see the instructor, they can see you. There might be a couple other kids in there, you might have it on your own, but typically there's 3 or 4 kids, and you'll ask a question and the tutor's there to help you work through it. And then if you have another question, you go into the queue. And what we've seen is a lot of students plan on going in there to ask their own question, and they'll stick around for an average of 45 minutes because they're hearing other kids ask questions. Like, oh yeah, that's a really good point.
Nice.
And they learn a lot from these other kids. And so the little room that you're in is subject specific. You're just in a room on chemistry. You're just in a room on algebra 2. You're just in a room on U.S. history kind of thing. And it's funny. What we found is some parents sign their kids up and the kids never use it. And it's not very helpful if you never use it. But for the kids that use it, they say it is so helpful and it really lowers their stress because it's 10, 11 at night and you're doing your homework and you can't figure it out. It ends up taking 2 hours, which should have taken 20 minutes. And it's a really stressful experience. And it really changes that from being a stressful experience into being, an insightful and educational experience.
Thank you. I'm really, really glad you went into depth on that. And another nice thing is with you having your West Coast tutors, people really can go on at 10 at night in the East Coast, maybe 7 in California. You've got people available, which is pretty cool.
It is cool. And that's the big thing that we were even expanding more for back to school is just even more hours. So people are going to be able to do it really kind of 12 hours a day in all these different subjects, 7 days a week.
Love it.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
The recommended resource for episode 37 is the website collegeresults.org. This is absolutely one of my favorite websites. When you first go to collegeresults.org, I recommend you click the video on how to use college results. Now, some of my favorite tabs are the Compare Colleges tab. You click that tab and then you enter all the schools you're interested in, and you have unbelievable graduation rate data. You can see graduation rates for Black students, Latino students, Native American students, Asian students, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Island students, white students, biracial, multiracial, female, male, and low income. After you look at that tab, I also recommend you go to the Financial Outcome tab, where you can see median income for each of the colleges for graduates. Another one of my favorite tabs is the Degrees by Program tab. And there you can see the percentage of students that are getting business degrees, education degrees, health science degrees, STEM degrees, and other things. All of the tabs are worth checking out. Those are just some of my favorites. I can't recommend collegeresults.org enough. We'll now return to my interview with Jake Neuberg. So I want to close out with something fun I started doing a few months ago called our Fave 5. It's 5 quick questions just for our listeners to get to know you a little bit more. So let's start with this one. What's your favorite food?
So I would say my favorite meal is good sushi. My favorite food is good fresh blueberries.
Oh, wow. You and my wife have something in common. What's your favorite TV show? Second one.
I'm going to go old school a little bit. My favorite TV show of all time has got to be Seinfeld. It's just so hilarious.
Yep, showing your age a little bit. But
I know.
But the parents will relate, and that's who our listening base is.
There you go.
Third thing, what's your favorite book?
I was thinking about this a lot. I just read a book that I thought was just really amazing. It was a memoir by a guy by the name of Norman Olstead. It's called Crazy for the Storm. And it was really pretty cool.
That's good. And I never heard of that. I have to look it up. Favorite place to vacation?
I am a big skier, as I mentioned before. So if I can be in the mountains skiing with my family, that's as good as it gets for me.
Good for you. And last thing, favorite dose of advice for parents and students who are listening?
That's a great question. I think the biggest lesson that I've learned and the best advice I can give is don't be afraid to shoot for the stars. Have ambitious goals. Don't let people tell you what you can't do. Learn from that student, Brett, who we were talking about before. But know that it's going to be hard work. Mm-hmm. And if you work really hard, you will surprise yourself what you can achieve. And we've seen that with students transforming and turning around their GPAs, making these dramatic 300 and 500 point increases on SAT. But with that hard work and smart work too, make sure you get the right people to help you out. You'll be amazed at what you can achieve with the right attitude and the right work ethic.
Jake, this has really been a pleasure. I thank you so much for coming on the Your College Bound Kid podcast. And tell us now where people can go who are inspired by what you've said. And they said, listen, I want to be on a mailing list. I want to look into your courses. where do you recommend they go as their next step if they want to learn how they can work with the Revolution Prep?
Absolutely. Any parents with younger kids in grades kind of K through 5 can check out Revolution Math. That's our math program, which is story-driven and character-driven, and I think they'll really love it. Students who are a little bit older can go to revolutionprep.com. And if they want to chat with me, people can always shoot me an email, jake@revolutionprep.com, and just let me know that they heard about us from College Bound Kid podcast. If they have any questions, I'm happy to be a resource.
Thank you once again. This has really been a treat.
Treat has been all mine. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it.
In next week's news, digging deeper into student loan default rates. And we'll be in chapter 38 of 171 answers. And we're going to answer, what is the National Merit Scholarship Program? And it's that time again for us to use our question segment for bonus content. And next week's interview, Mark will be with a high school senior, and they're going to be talking through her current college process. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send it to someone you know who could really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. Marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And Your College Bound Kid is produced by Esteban Sartho. If you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you would like to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text at area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on each show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.